Vanessa Toves is going to talk to us about incident response with Microsoft 365.
My name is Vanessa Toves. By trade, I am a Microsoft 365 Solutions Architect. So I've worked with Microsoft technologies since the very first version of SharePoint, SharePoint Portal Server, SQL Server, and Microsoft's whole BI suite. And I kind of followed my path, my career, followed that, SharePoint, all these platforms until they went up into the cloud. 4 years ago, I stopped being a day-to-day architect. And I did that because after taking so many companies and migrating them into the cloud, I could not believe how they weren't taking security seriously, right? Big organizations. So I went to work for Druva. Druva is a data protection company, but beyond that, it's a data security company. And what I love is that I get to educate people. In fact, this year I get to have my first non-architect-like session at Microsoft Ignite. And it's really talking to the architects, the partners about the life cycle of an attack and the type of information that's going to be needed, right? So when I first started with Druva, this was not an everyday occurrence, right? This is basically a rundown of what happened to typical customers, what was affected. It is almost an everyday occurrence now for our customer base. So when, we were talking about, what was his name? The last guy that was here. Yes, the human element. When I think of a ransomware attack, I think, right, so we have a protocol. If you're invited to get on these calls with a customer going through an active one, there's a protocol of who can speak because it's highly sensitive. There's a lot of stuff going on. So one of our customers that I was involved with actually had an attack. I got on the call, passive listener, and I have a sound now to a ransomware attack. And that was the shaking of his hands as he was clicking the keyboard. That's the sound for me when I think of what it sounds like, right? So this is an everyday occurrence. And what people don't know about Microsoft's ecosystem is that they're telling everyone what the threats are to that ecosystem. All right, now I think they're up to maybe 40% of the tenants are finally, they're on MFA. Holy crap. Only 40%. They're trying to get maybe it's 60. I think it could be 60. Of course they want 100%. But with regards to the data, people don't understand what's happening to the data, especially like the pairing. What does it mean for organizations to have 16% of these attacks, that are have a pairing of exfiltration and encryption? What does that mean when they're going through a recovery? What does it mean that now I believe the adversary in the middle, that's up 200%. So if you guys in the security world, if you haven't read this, and you'd be surprised how many Microsoft admins have not read this. It is a blueprint to what you should expect, what you could expect. Right, so read the Digital Defense Report. I don't get paid for Microsoft, but I really should, because I tell people, I'm like, the reality is there's a lot of data in here about what to expect. The only reason why backup is now one of the 5 fundamental practices of security is because Microsoft finally has a backup product, right? So let's understand where some of these things are coming from. They sell security, but the other things are real, right? This whole MFA fatigue attempts. When I was doing research about that, and I was like, oh, well, Microsoft's not the only MFA, right? It's just for the ones that use it that they have the stats for. The adversary in the middle, when I was reading about adversary in the middle, I called our team, our engineering lead, and I said, all right, let's talk about our tokens. Let's talk about everything about our stuff. I want to know what happens, you know, where's the data? Like, I know that we use refresh tokens, right? So there's the job of security now, especially when it comes to Microsoft, has to really also stem for anyone that touches the tenant, right? Touches the data. With this increase of human-operated ransomware attacks, I think that number is even higher. So they just released the 2024. So this is now the 5th year this digital defense report is out. And when you see 3 years ago that was like 99% attempt to attack the backups, it only can go up 1 more percent, right? So they stopped reporting that because it can't get any worse. I mean, I guess it could. It goes up that 1%. The other thing that people need to understand is the impact of the encryption. Right? It's an interesting stat that they have now that they're saying encryption is going down, but the attacks are going up. And so I'm like, that's a dumb math problem, guys. You can say that you're getting 33% decrease in the number of files encrypted as part of a ransomware attack, but the reality is when you quadrupled the number of attacks, it's the same thing. There's still an upward trend of encryption. You know, so you kind of have to read through some of these things to understand the impacts of this. All right, so when I talk about, I oftentimes get on a call and I work for a backup company and I get to represent what customers do with 365. So I talk to our engineering team and I'm like, no, we don't need that feature. What we need is this feature. I just did that for our Enter ID backup. I'm like raising my hand. I've got 5 things I want you to have in our next release. The other thing is these admins don't realize that they need to play part of a cyber incident response. Right? They need to know what is expected, know what is going to occur in these incident response. As you guys are running through a cyber incident, the admins have access to a lot of information, but they have to be prepared to give you that information before it's needed. Right? So what I mean by that is, you know, when we talk about, I'll kind of skip through this particular one. When we talk about like the top compromises for 365 and Azure or Enter ID, whatever you want to, in the back of my mind, every time I say Enter ID, I also say Azure and mumble it under my breath because it's no different, it's just marketing. Compromised credentials, compromised endpoints, still tops, right? The main attack vectors, admin accounts still, you know, even with our backup, we have a protocol. Companies love SSO, you know, so you challenge companies to say, you should probably not have necessarily SSO for your backup. I want to challenge you to tell me why you want SSO. Or you need a fail-safe. You know, you need an account that doesn't have SSO. Because SSO has opened the door to exfiltration for ServiceNow, opened the door to deletions, encryptions, corruptions, right? For 365, it's opened the door because of the bad practice of identity management in 365, in Enter ID. So even when you talk to vendors, as security individuals, you must also say anyone that connects into the tenant must also have elevated security. You need to tell me what you're going to do in case of a ransomware attack. So one of the reasons why, you know, when we first started, when I first started, there was a requirement for global admin. I'm like, no way. Why would you want global admin? You need to do a better job of your architecture of your platform, because I, as an admin, would never want to give an unmonitored account global admin. So, in fact, we don't. Now we support conditional access policies. Now we can support things like targeted resources or IP ranges from where our account or our platform calls Microsoft, right, for that data. So when you look at all of these apps that are integrated, you need to have this other checklist that says, I need to see what your protocols are. What are you going to do in case that attack, right? A valid account got compromised. There's SSO. They creeped into the backup, and now they deleted snapshots. 2 years ago, we started architecting for all of our backups rollback. It's a fancy word for the recycle bin. It holds the backups, it holds deleted data in place. So that even if someone did come in and maliciously delete data, we have the ability to now just roll that back. Right, so you have to think about too the window of the dwell time possibly that this is happening in. So being able to have an extended period of time where your backup data or whatever the third-party vendor. Remember, these third-party vendors, and the reason why I was like, I can't keep doing this architecture stuff. When all of these apps and teams get authenticated to access data, and no one's monitoring this in the tenant, in 365. There's no team that's doing that, right? So elevate the requirements for the vendors that are attached, right? Do they need global admin? Do they need elevated permissions? Why? Audit those enterprise applications that you have, right? Do you have service principal logins? Do you have, there's just a number of those things in terms of what you should be doing with third-party vendors, like even your backup companies, right? Now, we'll move on to the next thing. In this incident analysis, when we're talking about the analysis, you must have the now and any prior point of time within what's the dwell time, average dwell time today? Like when I started 4 years ago in this space, it was like 30 to 60 days. That's something was in an environment. Like, is there like an average now?
I think it's less than a week.
Yeah, less than a week. So you need less than a week's worth of comparisons. How will you know that throughout the week, did I add a new authentication method? Did I change my phone number? Right? What are the things that I changed as a user account? So from an analysis perspective, you must have, if you don't have a backup of Entra, you need to make sure that your 365 team is exporting this data. And hopefully, unfortunately, not saving it in a OneDrive or not saving it in a SharePoint. You have to save it somewhere else. Maybe where you saved your playbooks, right? Off the network. Because this is what you need to do the comparisons. All right, today, if I log in, there is no show me the devices as of yesterday. Show me the enterprise applications as of 6 days ago, right? So now we'll continue. What you might know, and I think one of the reasons why I have a job here in this, were you going to ask a question? In data security space is the impossible travel alert. It was the easiest one. It's an alert. It's one of the first alerts that was in 365. Vanessa logged in from Jacksonville, Florida. Vanessa logged in 5 minutes later from Australia. Not possible. And there's a protocol of what you do for the not possible things in 365, right? But many of these customers, I'm like, okay, guys, you create a ServiceNow response, you reset the password, all right? You scan the device for malware. There's like a number of things. Like there's things that you can do. That's people. What you don't have in 365 that you need is the change of data. So the change of data is I wasn't encrypted, or I was a 1 meg file, and I have an average of a 1 meg lifespan, and then all of a sudden I'm 4 times the size. That's a change of data, right? This is where it's also hard for Microsoft, because Microsoft has only one point of time of data. They might have version history, but they don't have the historics to do the analysis, and they're not doing it in that way, right? That files are now encrypted. There's a model. So this is one of the best parts about like being in my role. I get to talk about that architecture. I talk about in our platform UDA, unusual data activity. All right, Vanessa walked in. I'm a document. I walk in. I put my keys on the table. I put my laptop down, and I go straight. And that's what I've done for 99% of the time. But one day I walk in and I go right, and I go in the kitchen. That is a flag. That is a flag where data is concerned, right? So I might be sneaky. I might be a criminal, and I might be sneaky out there. And you guys can't see what I'm doing, but your data changes. The metadata changes about that. Where it was modified changes. So look for places, or like for me, right, our platform, look for places that provide you, the vendors that provide you this type of information, that during that analysis, during this even scope and containment, you know, when I'm talking to an admin, I say, how are you planning on doing how do you know what was affected? How do you know? I mean, you're going to wait for the tickets for your users to say, hey, I click on a file in my OneDrive and something happens. You're going to wait for 700 tickets, right? Or what? So having that type of data and analysis, and then being able to say, all right, what am I going to do with that? I have to contain it. That means if there was corruption, and I think about what happens now, which is in cyber insurance. I sat in on 2 cyber insurance seminars, very interesting, by the way. And one of the things was we want proof at the end that what you returned was clean, right? That you returned the organization back to the state. So that means I need to go and purge. What is different about Microsoft 365, OneDrive, and SharePoint, unlike a laptop or desktop, that if I had to replace if I had to replace this file on my laptop, I take a backup and I replace it. There's no footprint of anything else. OneDrive has 500 default versions. In the library, SharePoint default 500 versions, right? So someone should go in there, has to go in there and clean that out first. They have to go clean it. They either delete the site, or depending on the amount that was affected, restore it to a new account. You have to have a practice of understanding what is the policy that you're going to do about a OneDrive, or about a SharePoint, or the 5 SharePoint sites that are associated to a team, and that you've been able to identify that there's unusual data. There's encryption, right? What are we going to do before? Because we can't go and recover, we have to clean. So you need that file level detail. For some awesome PowerShell guy, take that file and they need to purge that stuff out. And this is called evidence, right? The answers are 32 sites. The evidence, UDA, or some unusual data, right? The model of the metadata has changed over a period of 17 days, and then this is encrypted, or right? So the answers and evidence that you require, and then the remediation. This is like one of the most important things, is that I work for a backup company, so we do this, right? Granular recovery. We have so many use cases. Someone wants to download an entire mailbox and all of the online archive. Sure, PST, here you go, whatever you want. I mean, every single use case. But now you have to think about the recovery of this data and that pairing. Remember at the beginning of what Microsoft is saying is happening, that last year 16% of encrypted files were also exfiltrated, all right? And that's going up, and by the way, is the first thing I look for in this year's. And I take about a week to read through that digital defense report and kind of like, sit with it. But that number has continued to go up. The methods of encryption, as we know, you guys know, It's not always to gain access to the data. It's very much so disruptive action. There is a difference between sensitive data and time-sensitive data. All right? What I know, because I've built so many solutions, I have migrated companies out of collaboration platforms and legal teams and moved them in, and gave them amazing processes, but guess what? The contracts are still in 365. They're in SharePoint. Now we've invested in all this awesome stuff, but now there's like this sprinkling of encryption over time. And that begins to make your backups and that point of time recovery, right? 7 days, 6 days. So if I had a project, so any of you guys, maybe if you any consultants in here? Great. You guys have a statement of work that's due Monday, and I recover your data a week old. That's time sensitive. That means I'm going to give it to you Saturday, and you've got to figure out what you're going to do. That has a potential financial impact. That's a small, simple example. We had a customer who lost the lease of their building because the legal contracts had that contract in. The lease renewal needed to be in by Monday, and guess what? They got the data back. They couldn't remember what the hell they changed. They were working on it. They missed the renewal date. They lost the lease on this place that they had invested. So sometimes it's not about someone wanting money. Right? So when you're thinking about the recovery of time-sensitive data, and you need to know this. This is why it's also important for you to have conversations with the architects, the solution developers, and say, what the hell are you building in here? What do you have? Not just sensitive data, because you can put some security around that, but how am I going to get this back? So I get to work for a company that has the only curated snapshot. We piece through every single one. You said 7 days. We can go back 2 weeks or however many weeks, and we're going to find the last known good, clean file. And that could mean that over a period of 7 days, a file comes from multiple different snapshots, but you build a snapshot on the fly. And I'm not here to tout the awesomeness of Druva. I'm talking about features and functionality. I'm talking about data loss. Right? Time-sensitive data has a different impact. Know if you have it, find out what you're going to do about it, where it is. Last thing that we'll talk about is the last step, the forensics. Now, most of the time, this team, right, so in a big team, I've dealt with risk management, I've dealt with legal, and they have different responsibilities, and they need different data. What they're going to look at is this. What's our exposure? Right, the CISO had 8,700 files. He had 1,500 encrypted. First of all, how are you going to even know that? Number two, of that, 159 of those files were sensitive data. All right, they're going to start at the 159, but you need to know how you're going to get them there, because we're talking about saving time, right, and getting everyone back to day-to-day, back to normal, and so on. So. All right, that's it.